Ms Wiz Goes to Hollywood by Terence Blacker. Read by Suzy Aitchison. Chapter 1. The Queen of Sheba. Shelley Kelly was sitting between her mother and her older sister Kate. It was the first day of half-term, and she was in a bad mood. All that morning she had been looking forward to watching an old film called A Star is Born, which was on TV that afternoon. But, as soon as lunch had finished, Kate and her mum had switched on a stupid daytime show called Just How Weird Is That? Right now, on the screen, a man and a woman were shouting at one another, while people in the audience screamed and laughed. "This is the saddest thing I've ever seen," Shelley muttered. "If you don't like it, you can go to your room, Shelley Kelly," said her mother briskly. "But it's A Star is Born," Shelley protested. "I had been looking forward to that film all day." "Two against one," said Kate smugly. "It's called democracy." "It's called unfair." Shelley's eyes filled with tears. As far as she could see, all that democracy meant was that in her own family she never ever got what she wanted. Sometimes she would sit in her room, going through her celebrity scrapbook, and try to imagine what her life would be like if she'd been born into a home like the ones she saw in films. Her mother would laugh at her jokes, and they would make homemade chocolate cookies together in a big kitchen and have giggly conversations at bedtime, and she would never ever have to worry about having a bossy older sister, because she would be a much-loved only child. And every afternoon after school, a few of her funny, good-looking friends would come round to play with her in the garden as the sun shone and the birds sang in the trees, and— "Phone!" A sharp dig in the ribs from Kate awoke Shelley from her daydream. From outside in the corridor she heard the ringing of the telephone. "Be a love, Shell," said her mother, lighting up a cigarette. Shelley stood up, wandered out of the room, and picked up the receiver. "Could I speak to Miss Shelley Kelly?" It was the voice of a man. He sounded strangely excited. "This is Shelley Kelly speaking." "Am I right in thinking that you entered the Celeb Magazine Fan of the Year contest?" Shelley frowned. She was always entering quizzes and competitions, but she was really not sure if she could remember that one. "Maybe," she said uncertainly. "Yowee! I'm delighted to tell you that you are the winner of our all-star competition. Start packing your bags right now. You're on your way to Hollywood for a week, all expenses paid." Shelley pulled sharply at her nose in order to wake herself up. "This is not a dream," said the man, as if he could read her mind. "But I'm only 10 years old," Shelley said. "No problem. In a few minutes' time, my colleague, Diamante Wisporina, will arrive at your door. She will be your special guide to Hollywood." "But—" "Cheerio, Shelley, old bean. Have a great time in Tinsel City." And the man was gone. Shelley walked slowly back to the sitting room. "Who was that?" asked her mother, without taking her eyes away from the screen. "It was a man telling me I had won a competition to go to Hollywood." "Get a life," muttered Kate. "Honestly, Shell," sighed Mrs. Kelly, "you and your daydreams." Just then the doorbell rang. Grumbling, Mrs. Kelly stubbed out her cigarette and went to answer it. A woman wearing a baseball cap and bright purple dark glasses stood on the doorstep. "My name is Diamante Wisporina," she said, "and I'm here to take a Miss Shelley Kelly to Hollywood." "Diamante who?" Mrs. Kelly asked a few moments later, as the Kelly family sat together on the sofa in the sitting room. "Wisporina," said the woman. As she took off her glasses, Shelley noticed that she had black nail varnish on her fingernails. "But my friends call me Ms Wiz." "Ms Wiz?" Ever since Shelley had arrived at St Barnabus School a few months before, she had heard stories about the mysterious woman with special powers who used to appear whenever magic was needed. No one had seen her for a long time, and the rumour at school had been that the famous Ms Wiz had given up spells to be a wife and mother. "I used to be a teacher," Ms Wiz continued. "Then I, did one or two other things. Now I work for Celeb magazine." "Well, you can be the Queen of Sheba as far as I'm concerned," said Mrs Kelly firmly. "No way am I going to allow my little daughter to spend half-term on the other side of the world with a total stranger." Ms Wiz laughed. "Oh, but I'm not a stranger. They know me at St Barnabas. When I saw that someone from Class 5 had won the big prize, I decided to take her to Hollywood myself." "Aren't you supposed to be a magician or something?" Shelley asked uncertainly. "A paranormal operative, actually," said Ms Wiz. "But I've retired from magic." She reached into the bag which was slung over her shoulder and took out 2 telephones, one purple and one yellow. "And this is a gift from the magazine to the other members of Shelley's family." Suspiciously, Mrs Kelly and Kate put the phones to their ears. At that moment, a faint humming noise could be heard coming from them. Slowly, they turned back to the television and sat motionless, a distant smile on their faces. On the screen, the people on Just How Weird Is That were frozen into immobility. "Ms Wiz," said Shelley Kelly, "about that business of retiring from magic." Ms Wiz glanced at her watch. "We have just stepped out of normal time," she said briskly. "I've got you a bag of clothes, a passport and tickets, and our flight is about to leave." "Flight?" Shelley shook her head in disbelief. "But I can't leave my mother and sisters sitting like a couple of zombies." Ms Wiz smiled. "When you return, they won't even know that you've been gone. You will literally be back in no time." A humming noise vibrated in the air. Shelley Kelly hesitated. It worried her that all the time she was away, her mother and Kate would be sitting there staring blankly at Just How Weird Is That? On the other hand, she thought, they would probably be doing that anyway. The humming noise sounded louder. "The glitter, the glamour, the chance to meet famous celebrities and discover what Hollywood is really like," whispered Ms Wiz. "What can possibly go wrong? All you have to do is touch my hand." Shelley reached out. "Bye, Mum, and Kate," she said quietly. "I'll see you in a minute." Her fingers touched those of Ms Wiz. There was the sound of rushing wind in her ears, a sensation of flying at great speed. Then everything went black. Chapter 2. Like a magic thing? Shelley Kelly opened her eyes. She was seated in a big leather chair, which was in a sort of cabin with a low roof, rows of seats, and small circular windows. She turned to Ms Wiz, who sat beside her, eyes closed and still holding on to her hand. Ms Wiz," she said, "we seem to be in a plane." "Correct." Ms Wiz spoke quietly. "We are in the first-class seats of Flight 7468 to Los Angeles." She squeezed Shelley's hand more tightly. "Just tell me when we've taken off." Shelley frowned. "You can't be nervous. I heard that you were always flying around on vacuum cleaners or chairs." "That's proper flying," said Ms Wiz. "This is just plain unnatural." At that moment, the curtains at the front of the plane drew back. A man and a woman, both wearing dark glasses and with white scarves concealing half their faces, were shown to the 2 seats across the aisle. As they settled down, carefully taking off their scarves, Shelley looked more closely at them. There was something about the man that seemed vaguely familiar. The suntan, the long floppy hair, the thin sideburns which curled to a neat point on his perfect high cheekbones. He had taken off his dark glasses and was adjusting his hair when he noticed that he was being watched. "Uh-oh," he said, in a voice just loud enough for Shelley to hear. "Fan alert." "Relax," said the woman, checking her makeup in a pocket mirror. "She'll be looking at me, not you," she said. "Oh, please. She is so not looking at you." The man gave a snickering little laugh. "That's a Bradette if ever I saw one." Shelley gasped as she remembered where she had last seen the couple. She had been sticking a photograph of them into her celebrity scrapbook. "Ms Wiz," she hissed, "across the aisle. It's Brad Latuke and Laurie Angelo." "Hmm?" Outside, the jets roared and the plane began to move forward. "They're the most famous, glamorous, romantic film star couple in the world." Ms Wiz held Shelley's hand so tightly that it hurt. She seemed to be praying. Shelley was finding it difficult to concentrate. A few moments ago, she had been sitting at home, feeling bored. Now she was on a jet flying to America, with Ms Wiz on one side and, on the other, two of her favourite movie stars. There were so many things that she wanted to ask Brad and Laurie. Was it true that they had been childhood sweethearts? Had Laurie cried real tears when Brad's character was hurt in a car crash in Miracles Can Happen? Did Brad feel jealous when Laurie had to kiss another actor in a film? What was their favourite food? Could she have their autographs? Unfortunately, the famous film star couple did not seem to be in the mood for conversation. Soon after takeoff, Laurie had complained about the type of champagne being served. Then Brad discovered that none of their films were being shown during the flight. Now they were just lying back in their seats, with white eye shields over their eyes, saying nothing. Suddenly, Brad sat up. "Something ran over my foot," he said. "Yeah, right," Laurie murmured from behind her eye shield. "I warned you about those pills you're taking." "It so did. It was like some kind of—" Brad shuddered. "Creature." Laurie raised her eye shield. "Hey, why don't you do what you do in restaurants and just walk out?" she said. "The exit is over there." Shelley turned to Ms Wiz. She was just about to tell her that Brad and Laurie seemed rather different in real life from their public image, when she noticed that sitting on the armrest beside her was a rat. It seemed to be wearing dark glasses. "Pleased to meet you, old bean," he said to Shelley. "The name's Herbert." He nodded in the direction of Ms Wiz. "I'm partner to Lady Muck here. I say partner. Between you and me, I run the show while she takes all the credit." "Thank you, Herbert," murmured Ms Wiz. "Oh, yes," Herbert continued. "It was me who rang you up, of course." Shelley blinked. "You rang me?" "Yowee! I'm delighted to tell you that you are the winner of our all-star competition." To Shelley's astonishment, the voice was exactly that of the man who had called her at home. "I'm very, very good at voices." Herbert lay back and started to sing. "California, here I come, lots of champagne in my tum." Ms Wiz opened her eyes and looked at him sharply. "Champagne? So that's where you've been, Herbert. I wondered where you had sneaked off to." The rat yawned and stretched out on the armrest. "Free champers for first-class passengers. Not a bad tipple, as it happens." "Oh, my goodness!" It was the voice of Brad Latuke. "Where did you get that cute toy?" Herbert turned slowly. "Toy, sir? I'll have you know that I'm as real as you are." He lowered his sunglasses and seemed to be staring at Brad's hair. "Possibly more real, if you know what I mean." Laurie Angelo laughed. "That's a great act," she said to Ms Wiz. "How do you work him?" Ms Wiz shrugged. "It's a long story," she said. "I was born with these special paranormal powers which allow me to do things that other people find unusual. Fly, change shape, move through time, keep a talking rat." "Like a magic thing?" asked Brad, who was still nervously running his hands through his hair. "You call it magic, I call it life." "You're in the business, right?" said Brad. "Who's your agent?" "Agent?" Ms Wiz laughed modestly. "Shelley and I are just ordinary people on our way to take a look around Hollywood." She paused, Then added casually, I probably won't even mention the book I'm writing. There's no business like Ms Wizness, My Life as a Paranormal Operative by Dolores Wisdom. Magic's very big in Hollywood right now, Brad said thoughtfully. Is there a really great, handsome, hunky male hero in your book? Well, there's my husband, Mr. Arnold. He's a school inspector, said Ms Wiz. Does he ride a motorbike, drink beer from the bottle, get in fights now and then, forget to shave in the morning? Is he kind of wild and kind of lost, yet deep down a really sensitive guy who's just looking for true love? Ms Wiz thought for a moment. Not exact. Yes, that's him, interrupted Shelley, nudging Ms Wiz. That sums him up perfectly. Laurie Angelo was smiling. I can see it now. A great new movie for all the family. There's no business like Ms Wizness, starring Laurie Angelo as Ms Wiz with Brad Latuque as Mr. Arnold. I prefer Mr. Arnold as a title, said Brad. I can see the posters now. Brad Latuque is Mr. Arnold. He leant across Shelley as if she didn't exist. Dolores, he gazed sincerely into Ms Wiz's eyes. I feel there is something very special going on here, he said. Will you promise not to mention this idea to anyone before we talk in Hollywood? Of course, said Ms Wiz. Laurie Angelo sat back in her seat. I've always wanted to play a witch, she murmured. Tell me about it, said Brad. Chapter 3. So One of the Team. Shelley Kelly was in paradise. During her first day, she had visited 2 studios, eaten the biggest hamburger she had ever seen, and had spotted Leonardo DiCaprio, or someone who looked very much like him, driving by in an open-topped limousine. When they returned to the Bel Air Hotel where they were staying, there were 3 messages at the hotel desk. The first read, Courtney, Brad Latuque's personal assistant, rang about the Wiz project. Please ring 333-4561. The second read, Mel, Brad Latuque's producer, rang Wiz project. Call him any time, day or night. The third read simply, Brad rang. Let's talk soonest. Ms Wiz smiled as she casually stuffed the messages into her back pocket. When you're hot, she said. Who will you ring first? Asked Shelley. Courtney, Mel or Brad? None of them. Ms Wiz walked briskly towards the lift. Remember the first rule of show business. Treat 'em mean, keep 'em keen. As they entered their room on the 33rd floor, the telephone was ringing. Ms Wiz waited for a while before picking up the receiver. Ms Wiz speaking, she said casually. Oh, hello, Brad. Yes, I got the messages. We've just come back from the 20th Century Fox studios. From where Shelley stood, she could hear Brad Latuque's agitated voice. No, Ms Wiz laughed. We weren't talking to them about my book. We were just looking around. She nodded. Meeting tomorrow. Your car will pick us up at 10. That's fine. Oh! Suddenly she seemed to be blushing. And you're very sweet too. Slowly she put the phone down. Ms Wiz? Shelley frowned. Did I hear you tell Brad Latuque that he was sweet? I was just being polite, said Ms Wiz in a distant voice. That's the way we talk in show business. He told me I was a very special person. You don't think that maybe he's just a tiny bit false? Shelley asked carefully. False? Ms Wiz spoke in a dreamy, distant voice. What on earth is false about him? Darling, honey, Dolores, light of my life, I haven't been able to sleep for thinking of you. Brad Latuque bounded across the office where they met the next morning and held Ms Wiz in his arms for several seconds. Hello, Brad. Ms Wiz extricated herself from the film star's arms. "You remember Shelley?" "Hi, kid." Brad nodded briefly in Shelley's direction, then turned to a long table where a man and a woman, each perfectly tanned, were sitting. "This is Mel and Courtney, my people." "Our people," muttered Laurie Angelo, who was sitting in a corner reading a magazine. "Whatever," said Brad, flouncing around the table and taking a seat between Mel and Courtney. "Dolores." Mel gazed across the table and seemed for a moment as if he were about to cry. "Brad and Laurie have told us all about you and—" He glanced at Shelley. "Your little friend. I have to say, we all feel privileged and moved to have heard your amazing story. It's funny, exciting, warm, and with Laurie and Brad on board, it's going to make audiences go home with hope in their hearts and a song in their soul." He paused, as if the emotion was all too much for him, then pulled himself together. "What was it about again?" Ms Wiz sat forward, then began talking. "My book, There's No Business Like Ms Wizness, is going to tell the story of my life. How I was born a few thousand years ago into a family of paranormal operatives, and going right through to today, when I spend most of my time with my lovely husband, Mr. Arnold, and my little boy, William, now and then visiting my friends at St Barnabus School." "Like Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Honey, I Shrunk the Kids," said Courtney. "I like it already." "This is so my kind of project," murmured Brad.
"Of course, although I do have strange and amazing special powers, I only use magic when it is needed," Ms Wiz continued. "For example, when my friend Podge was turned into a zombie slave and taken into the underworld by my evil sister Barbara, or when my talking rat Herbert fell in love and needed rescuing from the local environmental health officer, or when Jack travelled back in time and got lost in history. You know, little everyday things." "The X-Files meets Dr. Dolittle and the Time Bandits," said Courtney. "That's great, Dolores." Mel smiled, and the room seemed to be illuminated by his dazzling white teeth. "But you know, we're in the moving picture business. We need to be able to see these characters. Who is this Podge, this Herbert, this Jack? How will they play in a film?" "How would they play?" Ms Wiz closed her eyes, and a faint humming sound filled the room. Within seconds, the table seemed to be covered in a sort of mist. When it cleared, 3 glasses of sparkling water that were on the table appeared to be full of moving characters. "This is Podge," said Ms Wiz, pointing to the first glass where a rather large boy could be seen cramming a slice of pizza into his mouth as he watched TV. She moved to the second glass, where a father could be seen reading a picture book to a baby. "That's my own Mr. Arnold and William," she said, "and this—" She looked at the third glass, in which Herbert could be seen lapping something from a saucer. "Oh dear, that's Herbert back at the hotel, and he seems to have got hold of some champagne from the minibar." Slowly the pictures faded. "Sheesh!" Mel picked up the glass in front of him. "No way am I going to drink that water. It's had people in it." In the corner, Laurie had looked up from her magazine. "Lose the rat," she said coolly. "But you can't make a film about Ms Wiz without the famous Herbert," Shelley protested. Mel winced. "Here's the thing," he said. "Rodents are bad box office right now. And a rat with a drink problem, well, that's going to be a toughie, whichever way you look at it." "Maybe I could turn him into something else," said Ms Wiz. "A dog, perhaps." "That's it! Brilliant!" Mel clicked his fingers. "A cuddly, cute little mutt that's always doing the darndest things." "Benji meets the witches," said Courtney. Mel pushed a sheet across the table towards Ms Wiz. "Get your people to look over our contract and get right back to us," he said. "People?" said Ms Wiz. "We are our people. I'm sure your contract is absolutely lovely." There was a brief, astonished silence. "Lovely? Our contract?" Mel laughed rather too loudly. "Yeah, right. It's one of the wonders of the world." Brad Touquet held out a pen to Ms Wiz. "You are so one of the team now, Dolores," he said.
"Ms Wiz," said Shelley urgently, "wouldn't it be a good idea to read what it says first?" Brad half turned towards her and narrowed his eyes.
"When we need the advice of some little bradette, I'm sure you'll be the first to know."
"What's a bradette, Brad?" asked Ms Wiz as she signed the contract. Chapter 4. Spells and Smoochin'. Shelley Kelly was worried. It was 2 days since Ms Wiz had signed the contract, and since then she had been behaving more and more oddly. Most of the time she spent telling the story of her life into a small tape machine. Whenever the telephone rang, she started and said, "It's Brad," and ran to pick it up. But the call was always from Mel, who was asking whether he could pick up the tape she had been making. On the morning of her 3rd day in Hollywood, Shelley stood at the window of the Bel Air. Behind her, she heard the voice of Ms Wiz as she dictated her story. "I'll never forget the day when I first turned a head teacher into a warthog," she was saying. "My, how we laughed when—" On the other side of the room, Herbert was preparing for his big break in films as a dog.
"Woof," he said. "Sniff, sniff, sniff, woof. Oh, look, there's a nice telegraph pole. I think I'll lift my leg."
"You don't have to go that far, Herbert," Shelley shouted.
"Rover, if you don't mind," said Herbert. "In order to be a dog, I have to feel like a dog, think like a dog, even smell like a dog."
"You've managed that already," muttered Miss Wiz.
"It's called method acting," said Herbert, ignoring her. "I'll probably win an Oscar for Best Supporting Rat. I can see the headlines. Herbert raises the woof."
There was a knock on the hotel door. "It's Brad!" Ms Wiz squealed, jumping up from the bed and checking her hair in the mirror. But when Shelley opened the door, it was Mel who was standing there, with Courtney just behind him.
"Yo, people!"
Mel wandered into the room. Courtney was about to follow when she gave a little scream. With a shaking hand, she pointed to the dressing table, where Herbert was sitting up and begging with a matchstick in his mouth. "Don't worry," said Shelley. "It's only Herbert pretending to be a dog." Courtney looked more closely. "Like Supermouse meets 101 Dalmatians? That is just so wacky." Ignoring Ms Wiz, Mel picked up the tape recorder that had been lying on the bed and passed it to Courtney.
"We need this right now," he said. "Our writers are standing by to get started."
"But I'm still in the early years," Ms Wiz protested. "My very first spell. Memories of my lovely sisters. The day I met the children of Class 3 at St Barnabus."
Yeah.
The producer glanced at his watch.
"Maybe we'll give you another tape machine for the other stuff. Meantime, I've got a movie to produce."
Shelley stared at Mel. He had definitely changed since Ms Wiz had signed the contract. Before he had been all smiles, but now he seemed brisk and impatient. "Why is there so much hurry?" she asked. Mel looked down at Shelley, hands on hips.
"What is it with you, kid? How come you always make with the negative questions? Just trust us, right?"
"But it is Ms Wiz's story," said Shelley.
"Correction."
Mel smiled nastily.
"Was Ms Wiz's story. She signed the contract. It's ours now."
Ms Wiz frowned. "I think I'd better talk to Brad about this."
"He's not taking calls," said Mel.
Courtney stepped forward. "The truth is we've got a situation," she said, opening her briefcase and taking out a newspaper. "This is yesterday's Hollywood Reporter." Shelley took the newspaper. On its front page, beneath a picture of Brad and Laurie, a headline read, "Which hitch takes fizz out of Whiz Biz?" "What on earth does that mean?" Shelley asked.
"Don't they teach kids English where you come from?"
Mel grabbed the paper and began to read.
"Within days of the announcement that Hollywood's finest, Brad LeTouquet and Laurie Angelo, have committed to Wizzed, a major new spells and smoochin' feature, the project is in trouble. The story of zany screwball Ms Wiz, to be played by Laurie, and her on-off relationship with Brad's character, a washed-up stuntman called Mr Arnold, is said by its critics to be a witch too far. These stars are role models for our children," commented Ted Strait, whose Society for Disturbed Angry Parents, or STAP, has vowed to clean up Hollywood. We've heard that in this film they'll be changing people into warthogs, flying through time, and even descending to the underworld. What kind of example is that to our kids? Stapp says stop this weird stuff before it gets out of hand.
How ridiculous, said Shelley. What harm can a bit of magic do?
Truth is, we've got to head this thing off at the pass, said Mel. So here's the deal. We've just booked you onto tomorrow's Just How Weird Is That show. We want you both to go on nationwide TV and make like you're completely harmless. Woof me, woof on the show? Asked Herbert. You're kidding, said Mel. We got enough problems without fielding an alcoholic talking rat who thinks he's a dog.
I'm going to be on Just How Weird Is That? Shelley laughed. Mum won't believe it.
The only way we got you on the show was to agree that Brad and Laurie will be there too, said Mel. Then there will be the guy from Stapp.
He walked to the door, followed by Courtney.
It'll be fine. Just let Brad and Laurie do the charm thing while you act normal.
It was not until they had gone that Shelley noticed that Ms Wiz had turned very pale. Harmless, Ms Wiz. Act normal. Shelley smiled encouragingly. We can manage that, can't we?
Wizzed?
Ms Wiz stared into space. On-off relationship with a stuntman? A zany screwball? Just wait until Brad hears about this. What is it that tells me he knows already? Said Shelley. From across the room, Herbert growled. Chapter 5. Ditch the Witch. Shelley Kelly was sitting with Ms Wiz in a small room behind the Just How Weird Is That studios, watching the start of the programme on a TV monitor. In a few minutes' time, they had been told, they would be taken into the studio. In the meantime, Brad, Laurie and Ted Straight from the Society for Disturbed Angry Parents were on stage and were being introduced by the show's host, Jermaine Chance. Tonight, we have with us the world's favourite, most romantic film star couple. Jermaine gave a big TV smile in the direction of Brad and Laurie, who were sitting holding hands on the stage. And we also have Mr. Ted Straight, who says they've got to stop what they're doing for the sake of our kids. The camera panned to a smiling, middle-aged man in a dark suit. Because, guess what? Brad and Laurie have gone all witchy on us, Jermaine continued. They'll be making spells and all kinds of spooky stuff for Wiz, their next major movie. Later, we'll be meeting the person who gave them the idea, a lady who claims to be a real witch, and we'll be asking. She held up her hands like the conductor of an orchestra at the start of a symphony.
Just how weird is that?
Shouted the audience. I don't like the sound of this, said Shelley to Ms Wiz. But Ms Wiz was not listening. You know, they're only holding hands because they're in front of the cameras, she said, staring at the screen. That whole Brad and Laurie thing is history, she said. Ms Wiz, Shelley spoke gently, I think that right now you should remember that you are a happily married woman with a lovely young baby. Falling in love with a film star is a really bad idea. Love? Ms Wiz laughed girlishly. It's much too early to talk about love. It's just one of those holiday romances. I can't help it if Brad has special feelings towards me. Shelley was about to point out that as far as she could see, the only special feelings that Brad seemed to have were for himself, when the assistant director appeared at the door. You're on, she said. Moments later, Shelley and Ms Wiz were waiting behind a curtain at the back of the stage as Jermaine Chance spoke to the audience. Okay, so our next guest claims to be thousands of years old, she said to laughter from the audience. She says she has magic powers. Someone shouted, "Oh yeah, right," to more laughter. And now she's here to tell us that what she does is all a bit of fun. Please welcome, here with her young friend Shelley Kelly, Ms Wiz. The curtain drew back. As Ms Wiz and Shelley stepped into the lights to take their seats on stage, the sound of booing and laughter was deafening.
At the back of the studio, someone held up a placard with the words "Ditch the Witch" written on it. "So, Ms Wiz," Germaine stood at the front of the stage, a serious expression on her face. "Let me get this straight. You're a witch, right?" "Wrong." Ms Wiz's eyes flashed dangerously. "Witches are old-fashioned and boring. I am a modern paranormal operative, an everyday person who just happens to have a few unusual powers. Otherwise," she darted a shy smile at Brad, "I'm just an ordinary woman." "Witch, wizard, paranormal operative, it's all the same." Ted Straight spoke directly to the audience. "It sounds like a bit of innocent fun, but what disturbed, angry parents want to know is what all this hocus-pocus is doing to our kids. Okay, so first they play around with a bit of so-called magic, then they start dabbling with potions. Before you know it, they'll be caught up in a world of voodoo, weird spells, and ritual sacrifices of the family pet at the end of the garden." As the audience applauded, a man at the back of the studio stood up and Germaine Chance held up her microphone to him. "I'm one of Brad and Laura's greatest fans," he said. "I want to ask them why they haven't allowed themselves to get involved with all this crazy magic stuff." Laurie smiled. "I can promise our millions of fans that the main magic in this film is going to be the romance between Brad's character, Mr. Arnold, and me. Isn't it, Brad?" "Sure thing, honey. The spells are just a joke." When Brad spoke, Shelley noticed that his voice seemed to be deeper than it had been in real life. "Basically, Whist is about the relationship between Mr. Arnold, who's kind of wild and kind of lost, yet deep down a really sensitive guy who's just looking for true love, and Ms Wiz, who's kooky and romantic and who pretends to have special so-called magic powers because she's so lonely, sad, and weird." "Excuse me." Shelley had heard enough. In spite of her nervousness, she spoke up firmly. "The real Ms Wiz is not like that at all. She's not lonely or sad, and she's a lot less weird than most of the people I've met in this town. Her magic has made the children in my class really happy. She's our best friend and we love her." Several members of the audience started clapping, but Ted Straight stood up angrily. "See?" he shouted, pointing at Shelley. "This child is in her evil grip already." For a few seconds there was uproar in the studio until Germaine held her hands up for quiet. "Okay, Ms Wiz. Maybe the best way of proving your point is to show us a bit of magic right now. Why not turn this microphone into a lollipop?" Ms Wiz shook her head, and Shelley noticed that she was still staring at Brad with tears in her eyes. "I don't do spells to order," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," said Germaine, her voice harsher and more mocking now. "Just fly around the studio a couple of times." Before Ms Wiz could say anything, Brad sat forward in his chair. "You see," he said, "our friend, Ms Wiz, is funny in her own way, but she's no more paranormal than—" He hesitated, and a sort of humming noise could be heard in the studio. A look of panic crossed his face, as to gasps from the audience, his hair rose slowly from his head and hovered in the air like a flying hedgehog. "Brad's bald!" someone in the audience gasped. "He wears a wig!" "That is so not funny!" Brad screamed. As he tried to grab the flying wig, the sound of laughter grew in the studio. "I think that you've proved your point," Shelley said to Ms Wiz. "You've showed me what Hollywood is really like, and now I want to go home." Ms Wiz reached out her hand. "Thank you, Shelley," she called out over the din in the studio. There was a roaring sound in Shelley's ears, growing louder and louder, and suddenly everything went black. A few seconds later, she slowly opened her eyes. She was on her sofa at home, seated between her mother and her sister Kate, who was staring blankly at the TV. Like them, the screens seemed to be frozen in time. Together, the two brightly coloured telephones rang shrilly, like an alarm clock in stereo. Mrs. Kelly stirred on one side of her. Kate yawned on the other. On the TV, the couple on the Just How Weird Is That show that they had been watching began shouting at one another again. Jermaine Chance stepped between them and turned to the camera. That's about it for today's show. Tune in tomorrow for a special program with Brad Latuque and Laurie Angelo. We'll be asking, should they really be dabbling in magic? On the screen, there appeared a picture of Brad, Laurie, Ms Wiz and Shelley. That girl looks a bit like you, Shell, said Mrs Kelly. Ms Wiz smiled and waved at the camera as if she knew that Shelley was watching and was now saying goodbye. I just love that Brad Latuque, said Kate. He is such a hunk and so nice and normal with it. Shelley Kelly smiled to herself. Uh-oh, she said quietly. Fan alert.
Ms Wiz and the Sister of Doom by Terence Blacker. Read by Suzy Aitchison. Chapter 1. The One and Only. It was a dark and stormy morning. Low, wispy clouds raced across the sky as if they were late for a meeting. The wind whispered secrets through the winter trees, which stood like skeletons in the park. Jack Beddoes ignored it all as he made his sleepy way towards St Barnabus School. A black cat scurried across his path and disappeared into some bushes. "Yo, cat," Jack muttered. A magpie on a railing scolded what sounded like a warning as he walked by. "Cool it, birdie," said Jack as he walked under a high ladder that was leaning against a building. He turned the corner into Barnabas Road and almost bumped into his friend Caroline Smith, who was standing on the pavement writing something in a notebook. "Bit late to start your homework now, Kazza," he said. "It's not homework," said Caroline impatiently. "I'm making notes in my nature diary." "Nature? In the middle of this town?" Jack laughed. "Maybe you should come round to my place. Our cat has some really interesting fleas." Caroline nodded in the direction of the school, and now Jack saw what she had been looking at. On the roof, standing as still as soldiers on parade, was a row of large black birds. "Wow!" he said. "Vultures! They must have got a whiff of the school kitchen." "Carrion crows, actually," said Caroline, licking her pencil. "That's 13 carrion crows on the school roof, seen on," she checked the date, "Friday the 13th of December." "Hey, coincidence," said Jack. Shortly after the bell of St Barnabas School sounded for morning assembly, a long black car with the number plate Babs 13 drew up outside the school gates. A tall, blonde woman stepped out of the driver's seat and walked round to open the other door. From there, a pale, skinny man in a black suit emerged. The woman seemed to straighten the back of his coat before walking slowly with him through the gates. As the two of them crossed the playground, the crows on the roof set up a loud chorus of cawing and flapped their wings, making a sound like wet sheets blowing in the wind. The woman raised both hands, and the white of her nail varnish seemed to glow in the morning gloom. Within seconds the birds were still. The two dark figures entered the school. The end of the winter term had always been a difficult time of the year for Mr. Gilbert. Ever since he had become head teacher of St Barnabas, the month of December had brought problems. Sometimes parents were angry with him because their child was only playing a donkey in the nativity play. Or maybe Mrs. Gilbert was annoyed with him for buying a Christmas tree that was too small or too big, or one whose needles all fell off as soon as he got it home. Then there was always a row over which teacher should look after Class 2's gerbils over the holidays. Frankly, the last thing he needed right now was important visitors arriving at the school without any warning. "We are part of a government task force looking into education," the blonde woman told him when they were shown into his study. "Ah!" Mr. Gilbert smiled politely. "Which one?" "Which?" The woman narrowed her eyes. "Who mentioned a witch? We're perfectly ordinary education inspectors." She nudged the man who had accompanied her. "Ordinary education inspectors," he said in a deep, distant voice. "Now, all we need to do is chat to some of the children. I'll do that while my colleague Derek will stay with you." "Stay with you," said the man. "We're all terribly busy at this time of the year," said Mr. Gilbert. "There are plays to put on and end-of-term reports. Then there's the whole gerbil problem." The woman smiled dangerously. "I wish I had time to tell you just how little I care about your gerbil problems." She stood up. "Oh, and there was one other thing." Without warning, the room seemed to fill with a sharp, crackling noise. Mr. Gilbert's head slumped forward, his eyes closed. Within seconds, he was fast asleep. "One other thing," intoned Derek, his eyes blank and unseeing. Mr. Bailey, Class 5's teacher, was tired. The children always grew difficult and rowdy as the end of term approached, and this term was no exception. So he was quite pleased when a tall, blonde woman knocked on the door and told him that she was part of a government task force and that Mr. Gilbert, the head teacher, had suggested she meet Class 5. At least it meant he didn't have to teach for a few minutes. He drew up a chair beside his desk. "Take a pew, miss." "You can call me madam." But Mr. Bailey was looking more closely at the visitor. "Madam?" He smiled. "Don't you mean Ms? You've changed the colour of your hair, and that nail varnish of yours used to be black, but I do believe you're our old friend—" Suddenly, a sharp crackling noise could be heard. Mr. Bailey widened his eyes briefly, then slumped back in his chair, snoring loudly. "Goodness me," said the woman. "Your teacher seems to have nodded off." For a moment there was silence in the classroom. "Of course he was right," the woman smiled brightly. "I'm back. Isn't it great?" "Ms. Wiz?" There was uncertainty in Caroline's voice. "Yep," the woman nodded. "The one and only." "You look sort of different," said Jack. "What?" The woman's eyes flashed angrily. "Are you saying I'm not as pretty as my—" She hesitated. "As I once was." "Maybe it's the blonde hair," said Jack. The woman seemed to have regained control of herself. "It's what they call a makeover," she said. "But why are you here?" asked Podge Harris. "I thought you were Mrs. Arnold, looking after baby William and not doing any magic these days." The woman smiled coldly. "Witches don't need reasons," she said. Podge and Jack looked at one another in surprise. "But you always said that witch was an old-fashioned word and gave people the wrong idea," said Podge. "That was why you called yourself a paranormal—" The loud, angry crackling noise filled the room once more. Podge swayed for a moment, as if caught by a sudden gust of wind. Then he began to shrink, seeming to grow a bright shade of orange as he did so. Soon, all there was to be seen on his seat was a large pumpkin. "Thanks, fat boy. Pumpkin pie's my favourite." The woman walked to the back of the class, picked up the pumpkin and put it in her shoulder bag. "Nice trick, Ms. Wiz," said Jack, with a hint of panic in his voice. "Except you always promised that magic would be used for good things." "That's the thing about coming from the other side." The woman walked briskly to the door. "We change. Sometimes we're paranormal operatives, but then sometimes we go back to being a good old witchetty witch. In the past you've seen my generous side. Now," she opened the door, "it's no more Ms. Nice Guy." She slammed the door behind her. Caroline hurried to Mr. Bailey and shook him awake. What happened?" he muttered. "I was having a nightmare about teaching Class 5. He looked around him. Oh, no, it was true. "Ms. Wiz has gone all weird," said Caroline. "Tell me something I don't know," said Mr. Bailey. "She's turned Podge into a great big fat pumpkin," said Katrina. "Oh, really? How could you tell?" Mr. Bailey laughed at his own joke. "And kidnapped him," added Jack. Suddenly Mr. Bailey looked more concerned. "Oh, dear," he said. "Look!" shouted Lizzie, pointing out of the window. Walking quickly across the playground were the two dark figures. Class 5 watched as the woman stopped and seemed to fiddle with something at the back of the man's neck. As if he were a balloon, he shriveled up until he was a little pile of clothes on the ground. The woman picked him up, put him in her bag, walked to her car, and drove off. Behind the car flew 13 carrion crows. "Oh dear," said Mr. Bailey. Chapter 2. Just a Zombie Slave. By the end of that day, St Barnabas School was in an uproar. Mr. Bailey had hurried to the head teacher's office to explain what had happened while he had unfortunately fallen asleep during class, only to find that Mr. Gilbert was asleep as well. The caretaker, Mr. Brown, had been asked to look in all the cupboards and bins in the school grounds, just in case a large pumpkin had been left there. The police had been called in. Soon the school was alive with rumours. Ms Wiz was back. Ms Wiz had gone bonkers. Ms Wiz had turned Podge into a pumpkin and kidnapped him. At lunchtime, Mr. Gilbert nervously picked up the telephone and rang the town hall, where Podge's father, Mr. Harris, worked. "Ah, hello, Mr. Harris," he said, trying to sound calm. "I'm afraid we have a bit of a problem with young Peter. No, he hasn't done anything wrong. It's just that there has been, well, some rather unfortunate magic, and he seems to have disappeared with our old friend, Ms Wiz. Yes. Sorry. Please don't swear, Mr. Harris. How? Well, there's one other thing which I have to tell you." "Changed into a pumpkin?" It was after school, and Jack and Caroline were sitting in a small kitchen. Across the table from them, looking like she always did, only slightly more worried, was Ms Wiz. "Yes," said Jack. "Then she put him into this big bag and carried him off." "We hoped it had been you playing a trick on us," said Caroline. "Lizzie said that she read somewhere that Friday the 13th is a sort of paranormal version of April Fool's Day," said Jack. "Friday the 13th? Ms Wiz had gone deathly pale. "That's my sister's birthday." Jack and Caroline looked at one another in amazement. "Your sister?" said Jack. "We never knew you had a family." Ms Wiz was still frowning. "Of course I've got a family. I've got 18 lovely sisters." 18? said Jack. "How did your parents manage that?" asked Caroline. "Well, when mummies and daddies want to have a baby, they get together and—" "Thank you, Ms Wiz," said Jack quickly. "We know where babies come from." "Well, I've got 18 lovely sisters. We look exactly the same, and we all go wherever we're needed. There's Senorita Wiziana in Ecuador, Miss Wazza in Australia, Ms Wuzu in China. Magic knows no boundaries." "The woman who came to school didn't seem exactly lovely," muttered Caroline. 18 lovely sisters." Ms Wiz spoke distantly, as if she was remembering things she would rather have forgotten. "And one who is not quite so lovely. She was the 13th sister, and by a tragic accident she was born on December the 13th under a full moon, and that can only mean one thing. She's nothing but trouble. Her idea of a good time is to sink a few ships, whip up a hurricane, or invent a really nasty disease. She was always a difficult little girl, but she has grown up to be the embodiment of evil. They call her Barbara." "Scary name," Jack murmured. Ms Wiz sighed.
How could I have forgotten to send her a birthday card? But why did she pick on you? Asked Caroline. She could have visited Miss Wiziana or Miss Wazza. She was always jealous of me, jealous of my friends, jealous of my spells, jealous of my exceptionally good looks. Jack and Caroline looked at one another. I thought she was rather nice-looking, said Jack. Oh, you haven't seen her ankles. As for that ridiculous blonde hair. It wasn't her fault she was the 13th sister and born on Friday the 13th, said Caroline, thinking of her own little sister. With all that going on, she was always going to be a bit dodgy. Dodgy? Huh! Ms Wiz gave an angry little laugh. She always had to be the special one, with her wicked spells and her silly blood-curdling curses. And we all had to be really frightened of her just because she had the deadly mark of everlasting evil upon her. I know one should put it down to attention-seeking, but there is a limit. And I suppose that creepy bloke with her is your brother-in-law, said Jack. Ms Wiz shook her head impatiently. He's no one. He looked like someone to me, muttered Jack. Someone I'd very much prefer not to see again. No, I meant he really is no one. He doesn't exist, said Ms Wiz casually. He's just one of my sister's zombie slaves. Oh, fine, just a zombie slave, Jack gulped. That's all right then. Ms Wiz sighed. The problem is that if we don't move fast, Podge could become a zombie slave himself. Oh, Podge, moaned Jack. We, said Caroline. Did you just say we? At first, when Caroline's mother, Mrs Smith, returned from dropping off her younger daughter at a party to find the house empty, she was not too alarmed. Caroline was playing an angel in the school play, and she sometimes had to stay late for rehearsals. In fact, it was only when the telephone rang 5 minutes later that she really began to worry. I don't want you to panic, Caroline's voice sounded breathless, but there's been a bit of an emergency. An emergency? Are you all right? I'm fine, but Podge isn't. He's sort of disappeared. Sort of disappeared? What's going on, Caroline? It's a bit of a long story, Mum. All you need to know is that I'm in safe hands. Jack and I are with Ms Wiz. Oh, no, not her again. The last time I saw that woman, she shrank you and took you inside the television set. Talk about irresponsible. Anyway, I thought that these days she was Mrs Dolores Arnold, all married and settled down. She is, but even her husband, Mr Arnold, has agreed that this is such an emergency that it needs magic, so she's coming out of retirement. But what are you doing? Somehow, the mention of Ms Wiz's name seemed to make Mrs Smith even more alarmed. Where are you going? It's complicated, Mum, but we'll be back tomorrow. Wish us luck. But you haven't even got your toothbrush or a clean pair of... Thanks, Mum, said Caroline, and she was gone. As a matter of interest, where are we going? Caroline asked Ms Wiz. They had kissed baby William goodbye, told Mr Arnold they would be back soon, and closed the front door behind them. It has different names, said Ms Wiz, as she walked down her path. Some people call it the other side, or the dark beyond. I really don't like the sound of this, said Jack, hanging back. Personally, I prefer to call it the underworld. Underworld? Said Caroline. I get claustrophobia in a basement. Ms Wiz was waiting by the side of the road. She held out each of her hands. Hold on, both of you, she said. This is a very busy road. I think we're old enough to cross a road, said Jack. There was a distant humming noise. Hold my hand, quick, shouted Ms Wiz. As each of them touched Ms Wiz's hands, Jack and Caroline felt a jolt passing through their bodies like a giant heartbeat. They heard a whistling in their ears, and suddenly everything went dark. Chapter 3. The Purple Room. When Jack and Caroline opened their eyes, they were dazzled by whiteness. It was as if
They were in a vast winter wonderland, or a white desert, where the white sand stretched to a white horizon, where it met a white sky. There was no colour, or shade, or darkness or shape wherever they looked. Even the air they breathed seemed to smell white. Ms Wiz, said Jack, slowly taking his hands from his eyes. Would you mind telling me where we are? We are beyond space and time, between the real world and the underworld. Ms Wiz's voice sounded strange and muffled. Now we'd better hurry up or we'll be late. Caroline frowned. How can we be late if we're beyond time and space? Because it's a long way, said Ms Wiz. No, I'm sorry, said Caroline firmly, but if there's no time and space here, then things like a long way and being late are meaningless. Ms Wiz glanced at Jack. Is she always like this? She asked. She's been reading a lot of books recently, Jack explained. Sometimes when she starts talking in class, time really does stand still. I nodded off once, and when I woke up she was still in the same sentence. Ms Wiz was looking around her. She put her fingers to her lips and gave a long, low whistle. The sound died in the still air about them. Then silence returned. Suddenly Caroline screamed. Ow! Something touched my ankle! She grabbed Jack's arm. It was all soft and spooky. There was a soft, crackling sound, like the noise made by a sparkler, just in front of where they stood. Slowly, dark patches formed against the whiteness. They began to take shape. After a few seconds, a very old black and white cat appeared. It scratched itself lazily behind the ear. Ah, Cerberus, there you are, Ms Wiz smiled as she stroked the cat. Cerberus? Caroline frowned. Wasn't that the name of the dog in the Greek legends who had 3 heads and guarded the gates of hell? Ms Wiz laughed. Oh, you and your books, Caroline. Cerberus is a cat. And as you can see, he only has 1 head. What about the guarding the gates of hell bit? Asked Jack. Well, we'd better be going, said Ms Wiz quickly. Cerberus had sat down and was gazing into space. The white air in front of him seemed to part, revealing a small purple room containing 3 white armchairs. Cats have special powers, Ms Wiz said quietly. No one can enter the underworld without Cerberus's help. She stepped into the room and turned to the cat. We'll be wanting level 13, she said. Cerberus hissed and raised his hackles. It's all right, we won't be staying long. Ms Wiz turned to Jack and Caroline. My sister isn't very popular down here, she explained. As soon as all 4 of them were in the room, the doors closed behind them. Seconds later, they felt themselves moving downwards faster and faster, like a pebble falling from the sky. Going down, Ms Wiz sang out. Caroline slumped into one of the chairs. I wonder what Mum's doing, she sighed. Mrs Smith had rung the police. Then she had rung Jack's mother, who said that she was sure that the children would be safe with Ms Wiz. Then she had rung Podge's father, who had shouted so loudly that she almost dropped the telephone. But it was when she met the policeman in charge of the case that she really began to worry. Detective Constable Sidney Burton at your service? A trim, grey-haired man in a dark suit stood at her door that evening. He might have been a businessman if it were not for the large gold earring that dangled from his right ear. I am the local psychic detective who'll be looking for the 3 missing kiddies. Now, if I could just ask you... Psychic detective? Said Mrs Smith. Oh, yes, we do a lot of paranormal work in the modern police force. You'd be surprised how much crime is being done by dark forces. That's when I get called in. They call me Psychic Sid. The man put both hands to his forehead and half closed his eyes. I'm getting a vibration that your daughter is called Caroline?
Mrs. Smith sighed heavily. "That's because I left her name at the station," she said. "I thought so. My vibrations never let me down." The detective took out a notebook. "I'll be needing Caroline's relevant details. Star sign, position on the astral plane, lucky number." "Are you sure this is normal police procedure?" "What is normal? What is procedure? It's all a mystery, isn't it, madam? That's why we intend to meet this evening in the classroom at St Barnabas, on the exact spot where the boy Harris was turned into a pumpkin. We'll all hold hands and try to reach the other side to find out where they are." "The other side of what?" "The other side of reality, madam." Mrs. Smith shook her head. "All right, I'll be there," she said. The purple room was beginning to slow down. Shimmering in the air at the centre of the room, as if lit by laser beam, was a sequence of rapidly changing numbers. 20, 19, 18. "I wish you could meet some of my sisters," Ms Wiz said absently. "You'd love Senorita Wiziana. As for my Chinese sister, Ms Wuzu, she's a laugh a minute, but we just don't have time." At that moment the number 13 hovered in front of them. While the other numbers had all been different bright colours, this was the darkest black. As the room slowed down, a strange, unearthly sound reached them through its walls, hammering, clanging, echoing, with an occasional almost human moan. The room came to rest with a bump. "Welcome to the underworld," said Ms Wiz. Slowly the doors drew back. Chapter 4. Pumpkin Pie. They were in a vast, dark cavern. An odd smell, smoky yet damp, like mouldering leaves on a bonfire, hung in the air. Around the walls, by the light of flickering candles, hundreds of men and women were working at long metal benches. Not one of them looked up as Ms Wiz stepped out of the purple room. "Zombie slaves at work," Ms Wiz said casually. "My sister does like to put on a nice show for visitors." "We'll wait here with old Cerberus," Jack called out. "Say hi to your sister for us." But Caroline was following Ms Wiz. "Zombie slaves are probably like tigers. The important thing is not to let them know that you're frightened." "Ah!" Her scream echoed off the walls of the cavern. "Something ran over my foot." "It's only a zombie rat," said Ms Wiz casually. "It doesn't really exist. Barbara's just showing off." Jack was standing near a group of slave zombies. "They're making little mirrors," he said. "Maybe we could take one back as a souvenir." "Except these mirrors break as soon as you look at them," said Ms Wiz grimly. "And over there," she pointed to the other side of the cave, "they'll be making invisible ladders that you could walk under without noticing, or putting tiny cracks in paving stones which people tread on without realising." "It's a sort of bad luck factory," said Caroline. "Yep, this is where they breed all the black cats in the world." "Oh, come on, Ms Wiz," Jack laughed. "We've got a black cat. You're not telling me that Dodger came from the underworld." "You look into his eyes when you get back," said Ms Wiz. "You'll see what I mean." She was standing in front of a small wooden door which had been built into one of the walls of the cavern. On it, painted in red, was the number 13. She had hardly knocked on the door once when it swung open. The tall, blonde woman Jack and Caroline had last seen at St Barnabas stood before them. "Why, Dolores," she said, kissing Ms Wiz on both cheeks. "What a delightful surprise." "Hi, Barbara, and don't pretend you haven't been watching us," said Ms Wiz coolly. "I believe you have already met my friends Jack and Caroline." Barbara stepped forward and shook hands, first with Caroline, then with Jack. "Enchanted," she said, adding beneath her breath, "or at least you soon will be." She turned, calling over her shoulder, "Do come in, we were just having tea. Pumpkin pie." Pumpkin," Jack stammered. It's not Podge, is it? All his life he loved pies. Now he's become one. Barbara laughed. Oh, not that, Pumpkin Jack. What do you think I am, some kind of monster? She opened the door and ushered them into what seemed to be a small, neat, normal sitting room. A single figure sat alone on a dark red sofa by a blazing fire. He had a cup of tea in his hand and was smiling vacantly. It was Podge. "Yo, Podgy boy!" Jack laughed. Podge, smiling and staring ahead of him, took a sip of his tea but said nothing. "He's tired after his journey," said Barbara. "Come on, Podge, don't you want to say hi?" "Hi," said Podge, his voice distant and lifeless. "Something's wrong, Ms Wiz," Caroline whispered over her shoulder. There was no reply. "Ms—" Her words were lost as a sharp, crackling noise filled the room. "Barbara, no!" Ms Wiz held up a hand, but even as she did so, she began to shrink and flatten and become oddly bristly. Soon, in the place where she had been standing, there lay, steaming slightly, a doormat. "Why, Dolores, what a lovely surprise! This was just what I wanted for my birthday. I'll always treasure it." Giggling like a little girl, Barbara walked to the doormat and deliberately wiped her feet on it. "But you can't do that," said Jack. "Ms Wiz is the one who does spells. She doesn't get changed into things." "Except when she's on level 13. In this part of the underworld, I have power over all living things. It's so typical of my sister to forget that. She always was the absent-minded one. Now, she's not so much Ms Wiz as—" Barbara cackled. "Oh, Ms Was." "You mean she can't free herself?" Caroline asked. "Nope." Barbara shrugged her shoulders skittishly. "I'm afraid we are a bit of a mad family," she said. "We do love our little jokes." She sat down on the other side from Podge and picked up the teapot. "Now, don't stand on ceremony. Take a seat and we'll have some nice tea. After all, we've got so much to discuss, haven't we?" Nervously, Jack and Caroline lowered themselves onto the sofa. They were alone. They were in the underworld, and Ms Wiz had been turned into a doormat. "Now," Barbara poured the tea. "One lump or two?" Chapter 5. A Brand New Ms Wiz. It was late evening when the worried parents of Podge, Jack and Caroline gathered in Class 5's classroom at St Barnabas with Mr Gilbert and Mr Bailey. The paranormal investigator, Detective Constable Sidney Burton, better known as Psychic Sid, stood in front of the blackboard, a crystal ball in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, we shall shortly be making contact with the other side," he announced. "I shall ask you to gather around the lad Harris's desk and place your hands on the special magic crystal. Our energies will then help me reach the astral plane, where I shall endeavour to pursue my investigations." "Astral plane? Magic crystals? Detectives wearing earrings? I've seen it all now," muttered Mr Harris. "What happens if you actually meet the dark forces on the astral plane?" asked Mr Bailey. "Dark forces?" Psychic Sid looked worried. Well, should I actually meet one of the undead, I shall ask him to accompany me down to the station so that he can be eliminated from police inquiries. Right, gather round, everyone." In the depths of the underworld, Jack and Caroline were experiencing the worst tea party of their lives. "But children, you were not drinking your tea," said Barbara, in a voice which was as twinkly and innocent as that of a favourite aunt. Caroline glanced at Podge, who was still staring into space. "To tell the truth, when one of your friends has become a slave zombie and the other has been turned into a doormat, tea suddenly doesn't seem that important," she said. Barbara chuckled. "Oh, don't worry about my little tricks," she said. "Nothing is forever. Not even in the underworld. Of course you can take your plump little friend back. All you have to do is agree to be my friends." "What, Like pen friends, said Jack. Not exactly. Her eyes grew distant. You see, I've never really had friends like my sisters did. Even when they were little girls, they used to have parties and magic spell competitions. I tried to... Barbara gave a little giggle. Enter into the spirit of things. I'd release vampire bats in their bedrooms, or slip deadly nightshade into a birthday cake, or turn their favourite cats into werewolves. You know, the usual innocent childish pranks. But they never let me join in. I was always a bit different. I can see that, muttered Caroline. So I decided that you and all the children of St Barnabas would be my friends. I'd invite you to tea, and then you could ask me to come back to school now and then. Dolores has had such fun with you in the past. Now it's my turn. I'll be your brand new Ms Wiz, only better. I'll be there whenever magic is needed, and sometimes even when it isn't. Before Jack or Caroline could say anything, Barbara stood up and did a little dance around the room. I'm going to be a paranormal operative like the others, she chuckled. And to prove it, she stopped in front of Podge, laid a hand on his head and began chanting, Malleus, Maleficarum, Transformatum, Podgus, Fat Boy, Normalus. There was a sharp crackling sound. Podge's whole body was lifted from the chair for a few seconds. When it came back to rest, Podge shook his head and looked around him as if waking from a long sleep. Hey, I'm starving. Jack laughed out loud. Yo, Podge is back, he said. Where am I? Podge was looking around him. What happened? Well, that's settled, interrupted Barbara. We're all friends. I'll see you again soon, and you can bring all the other nice little children from your class to the underworld now and then. The next time you see Ms Wiz, it will be... She gave a little shudder of excitement. Moi. What about the real Ms Wiz? Asked Jack. She's got a husband and a baby and a home. Do they need a doormat? Barbara asked cheerfully. I'm sure something could be arranged. Couldn't you bring her back so that we can say goodbye to her? Asked Jack. Barbara waved her right arm airily. Oh, you can say goodbye to her as she is. Just give her a little wipe as you leave. She stood up and showed them into the hall with impatient little brushing movements. There was one thing, said Jack casually. I was wondering if I could have your autograph. I've got a few celebrities, but I haven't got a real live Queen of the Underworld in my book yet. Barbara blushed. Oh, I wouldn't say queen. More like a sort of princess, really. I'll go and get a pen. As she turned back into the sitting room, Jack grabbed the doormat, and before Podge could protest, he pushed it under his jersey. Go! Hey, I'm not nicking doormats. But Caroline had taken Podge by the arm and had pushed him briskly out of the door. Here we are, Barbara returned, carrying a bit of paper. I've put 2 Jack happy spells from your new Ms Wiz. Cheers, said Jack, backing out of the door. I'll always treasure it. Bye! Barbara waved gaily and closed the door. Podge was looking at the cavern of the underworld. What is this place? He muttered. Tell you later, hissed Jack. There's Cerberus! Caroline laughed with relief as the black and white cat lazily stood up, giving a soft meow of welcome. OK, Cerb, shouted Jack. We're out of here and fast! The cat stood up, stretched and yawned. There was a faint crackling sound, and 2 invisible doors drew back to reveal a purple room. They were about to jump in when they heard a deafening roar of rage behind them. My mat! Where is my mat? A terrifying figure stood in the middle of the cavern. 2 meters tall, hands reaching out like great scaly claws, eyes shining blood red in the gloom. It was Barbara. I want my sister. I will have my sister. All around her, the zombie slaves stopped working and turned their vacant eyes on the 3 children. The walls and floor of the cave seemed suddenly to come alive, writhing with snakes and huge scurrying spiders. "Bring back my sister!" Caroline took a deep breath. "I thought you were going to be a nice, friendly, paranormal operative from now on," she called out. "Nice? Me? That'll be the day." With huge, slow steps, Barbara advanced towards them, hundreds of her zombie slaves following her. "But you said—" "Not now, Caroline!" Jack pushed her and Podge into the purple room. "Doors, Cerberus!" he screamed. As Barbara approached, the doors drew slowly to a close. At the last minute, Cerberus the cat jumped out to leave Jack, Caroline and Podge alone as the room began to rise. "Would someone mind telling me why I've got a doormat stuffed up my jumper?" asked Podge. But before there was time for an answer, the purple room began hurtling upwards, dissolving to whiteness as it went. The meeting, organised by Detective Constable Sidney Burton, was not going too well. He had asked whether anybody was out there, but there had been no reply. He had told the spirit world to move the crystal ball, but it had remained still. "I shall ask you one more time," he intoned. "Is there anyone out there who knows the whereabouts of 3 lost children, one of whom may be disguised as a pumpkin?" A loud, crackling sound could be heard at the back of the classroom. Parents, teachers, and Psychic Sid stared in amazement as a white cloud ascended through the floorboards. It cleared slowly to reveal Jack, Caroline, and Podge. "Blimey!" Psychic Sid was the first to react. "It worked!" Podge seemed to be in a sort of trance. Eyes closed, he dropped to his knees, clutching his stomach. As he rolled onto his back, his jersey seemed to swell. A shape within began moving round, getting bigger and bigger, until a split appeared in the material. "Call the police!" stammered Psychic Sid. "I'm not arresting a blooming alien all by myself." 2 hands with black nail varnish on the fingernails were pushing their way out of Podge's jersey. Soon, the head and shoulders of Ms Wiz appeared. Carefully, she stepped out and brushed herself down. "It's a nice place to visit, the underworld, but I wouldn't want to live there," she said. Still lying on the floor, Podge slowly opened his eyes. "You wouldn't believe the dream I've just had," he murmured. As Jack, Podge, and Caroline ran to their parents, Psychic Sid squared his shoulders. "Ms Wiz, I'm arresting you for kidnapping 3 innocent children," he said. "I don't think so." Ms Wiz walked forwards. When she reached the blackboard, there was a faint humming noise, and she disappeared, to be replaced by a small, neat drawing of herself on the board. "You'll be wanting my sister." Her voice sounded distantly from behind the blackboard. "Humph," said Mr Harris. "She'll be another paranormal operative, I suppose." "Oh, no." The voice sounded fainter now. "She's an absolute, perfect witch." Jack smiled at Psychic Sid. "Would you like her address?" he asked.